Good afternoon. This is Bray Patrick Lake. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, and I'll be serving as moderator this afternoon for Genetic Alliance's webinar on the Sentinel System, FDA's post-marketing safety surveillance system for medical products. So today you're going to be hearing from two presenters. Our first is Tyler David Coyle. He is a medical epidemiologist with the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, which resides in FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Tyler earned his MD from Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. He's been very dedicated to the field of epidemiology at FDA, but he also has personal interests. He enjoys craft beer, cooking, and he reads science fiction. After Tyler, you'll be hearing from Steve Mikita, who is an FDA patient representative for the rare disease spinal muscular atrophy. Steve's a patient engagement representative for the Sentinel System, and he's also a member of the Sentinel Planning Board. For the last 3 years, Steve has led the Engagement Partners Workgroup to raise awareness of the Sentinel System. Steve lives in Salt Lake City, and he is also an attorney. So with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Tyler.
Great, thank you very much. So again, my name is Tyler Coyle. I'm a medical epidemiologist at the FDA, and it's my pleasure to speak with you today about the Sentinel System. And first off, I just want to thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me, and Steve Mikita for leading the work group that has underpinned the framework leading to this webinar, and also to all of you for joining us to learn a little bit more about the Sentinel System. So you might be asking, what is Sentinel? Well, if you remember one thing about this presentation, I hope you remember this slide. Sentinel is FDA's medical product safety surveillance system created in response to a congressional mandate. Sentinel is composed primarily of electronic healthcare data and administrative claims data. It's also based on a distributed data network and a common data model, and we'll go over what all those things mean. But first, let's look at a little history of the Sentinel initiative. In 2007, Congress passed the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act, or FDA, as we call it at FDA. FDA told FDA to create an active surveillance system for monitoring medically regulated products nationwide. So in response, in 2008, FDA launched the Sentinel Initiative. In 2009, this initiative evolved into a full-fledged pilot. And in 2011, this pilot grew and grew and grew to the point where it encompassed 100 million lives worth of data as mandated by the legislation that created it. Further, in 2012, we continued to build the system so that a suite of reusable programming tools could be used to ask questions of this enormous data set. And finally, in 2016, FDA launched the Sentinel System as a routine component of drug surveillance at the Food and Drug Administration. Sentinel uses secondary data. This means that the Sentinel System isn't going out and collecting primary data from patients. Instead, it's using data generated from patient interaction with the U.S. healthcare system. As you know, the U.S. healthcare system has some quirks, and so Sentinel has been built to try to adapt and modify to these quirks so that we can get the best data available. As you know, data is collected for a lot of different reasons in healthcare. One reason is for reimbursement, payment, and billing. Another, equally, if not more important reason, is to document clinical care. Additional data is collected to support physician decisions and for other reasons as well, such as record keeping and registries. So data is the central component of Sentinel, of the Sentinel system, and it's what we spend a lot of time on. So just to reiterate the previous slide, data is collected for administrative purposes. It also collects clinical data. So when you go and visit your healthcare provider, that data may be collected by Sentinel. And registries are an important source of data, particularly for specific populations of interest, and particularly for less common diseases. Sentinel captures billions of encounters with the healthcare system. From 2000 to 2016, we have over 223 million unique patient IDs in our database, with nearly 180 million of these patient IDs having both medical and pharmacy data associated with them. Currently, there are over 40 million people accruing new data in the system, and there are over 400 million person years of observational time within the Sentinel system. It's enormous. So how is all this organized? It seems really like there's a lot of disparate sources and a lot of different kinds of data. So it seems like it would be hard to put it all together. Well, you're absolutely right. And so that's why Sentinel is based on a common data model. A common data model is a language that different health system data sources can convert their information into, that allows for aggregation of large amounts of data into discrete populations and samples. So patient data stays secure because the source information stays at the healthcare system in the Sentinel distributed database. So here's a schematic showing what I'm talking about here with the distributed database and with a common data model. As you can see in the top right, you see the Sentinel Operations Center, or SOC. Now, FDA works with the SOC to generate a question in the form of a computer program. Sentinel Operations Center then sends this very specific computer program to the data partners that are distributed across the country and represent a variety of different entities and healthcare payers. These healthcare payers and data partners have all converted their data into the common data model format that includes elements such as enrollment, demographic information, medical utilization, so how many times they're visiting the emergency room or a patient is visiting the primary care provider, pharmacy prescriptions, diagnoses, procedures, lab tests, and vital signs. So all these data are held in this common data model format. The computer program runs against that data, generates results, and then that data is fed back to the Sentinel Operations Center for review and creation of a report that's then reviewed and interpreted by FDA to guide regulatory decision-making and safe drug practices. So the Sentinel Operations Center lead is the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute. There are other very important members of this system who contribute valuable expertise, such as the data and scientific partners listed here, and then further scientific partners who are collaborators on important and large-scale projects that help us better understand the safety of regulated medical drug products. Here's a listing of some of the data partners. This is not an exhaustive list, but as you can see, we've got some big names in there that have enormous amounts of data, and we really value our close relationship with our data partners, because without them, Sentinel cannot do what it's meant to do. So why is Sentinel important? Well, Sentinel generates real-world evidence to support regulatory actions aimed at protecting the public health. And this evidence helps inform healthcare provider decision-making for patients. So it helps the providers and it helps the patients. And all that aggregated helps the public health. So you might be asking, what kinds of questions can Sentinel answer? Well, here's a brief overview of some of the simplifications of some of the questions we have looked at recently. So the number of tablets of a particular drug dispensed to outpatients in 2015 or any year in the last 10 to 15 years, depending on what you're looking at. Or you could ask, what is the fraction of patients who fill the prescription who are also filling a prescription for another product? Or the most sophisticated kind of analysis looks at the risk of a specific problem among patients who use multiple drugs or are in very specific circumstances. So these different tiers of analytic complexity guide the Sentinel System's approach to asking and answering important regulatory questions relating to drug safety. I want to take this opportunity to direct you to our webpage, sentinelinitiative.org. And the reason I'm doing this is not just a shameless plug, but also because we really take transparency seriously. So everything that we do, we post, that we're allowed to post. Now, obviously, there are things as a regulatory agency that for legal and regulatory reasons, we can't post to the public in real time. But everything else that we can, we post. We want to be as transparent as possible to providers, to patients, to industry, to everyone, so that they can see what we're looking at and why we're looking at it. And all the reports are available at this website, as well as a whole bunch of other information that you might find useful. One of these pages that you might find useful is a page looking at how Sentinel's ARIA system, or Active Risk Identification System, analyses have been used by the Food and Drug Administration. This page is helpful because it connects the dots between what Sentinel has studied and the impact that this analysis has had. So you can see, for example, in this screenshot, you can see that we did an examination of the drug levetiracetam, or Keppra. We looked at the outcomes of anaphylaxis and angioedema. It was a level 1 analysis, so it was a descriptive analysis. And then we connect that to, there was a drug safety label change. So the drug label change, in part, supported by information generated from a Sentinel analysis. So I encourage you to check out this webpage if you want a clearer picture of how Sentinel has been used and the impact it has had for real-world decision-making. What can patients do? This is all well and good, but it seems like it might not be terribly relevant to patients. Well, that's where I would disagree with you. Patients can engage with the Sentinel system by talking with their healthcare providers and insurance plans about the Sentinel system to build awareness. Despite Sentinels having been around as a pilot or as a full-fledged system for over a decade, we still have room for improvement when it comes to building awareness and spreading the word about the value that Sentinel adds to the public health ecosystem. Additionally, you can visit our website for news and updates about the kinds of projects that we're undertaking and why we're doing them, and other opportunities to get involved, such as attending one of our many public meetings or workshops. We want to hear from you. We want to keep the doors open and the lines of communication open so that we have patient and stakeholder engagement and input as we continue to build and develop our system. So in February this past year, or in 2018, we held our 10th annual public workshop in Bethesda, Maryland. It was a 2-day affair, and we had a terrific turnout. Over the 2 days, we had over 1,000 people attend in person or via webinar. And so I would encourage you, if you're in the DC area, or if you're looking to make a trip towards the nation's capital, or if you just want to dial in from wherever you are, to attend next year's public workshop, which is going to be in the spring of 2019. So in summary, this has been a whirlwind overview of Sentinel, which is FDA's National Medical Product Monitoring System. Sentinel uses a common data model and a distributed database, and it generates evidence to inform clinical decision-making, which supports public health efforts. There are multiple ways to stay informed and active with Sentinel, both on the Sentinel website and through next year's public workshop. And so with that, I would like to thank you, and I'm going to turn the ball over to my friend Steve, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the efforts of our work group.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending, and thanks to Genetic Alliance for supporting this webinar, and for Sharon Terry for her leadership, not only at Genetic Alliance, but for so many other initiatives, and also to be a member of the Sentinel Engagement Partners Workgroup, along with Bray and Patrick Lake. Both Bray and Sharon developed the messages in large part for health advocacy groups, and it's been a joy to work with Tyler Coyle. Everything that I know about patient advocacy, I learned and am still learning from Bray. Next slide, please. A little over 3 years ago, a multi-stakeholder work group was formed to raise awareness about the Sentinel System among 4 critical engagement partners, namely the public, health advocacy groups, providers, and even the health plan members. The goal was to inform each of these groups about this invaluable safety tool, how it works, and its commitment to protect patient privacy. Next slide. The work group was tasked with, first, creating a plan of action to increase awareness about the Sentinel System, to shine a light on its successes, and to articulate its value proposition. Next, we developed customized messages to reach all 4 target constituencies and receive feedback from all the relevant targeted audiences to focus each story to be both meaningful and relevant. Next slide, please. All right, this diagram illustrates the interdependent nature of our multi-stakeholder work group. Each engagement partner sector informed the respective Sentinel System stories that our work group developed. Next slide, please. Our efforts were framed around 3 foundational principles. Each of the 4 Sentinel System stories are open and transparent about Sentinel's purpose, capabilities, and successes. Each story is relevant and meaningful to the respective engagement partner group, and the specific narratives, as well as dissemination channels, must be effective and understandable for each constituency. Next slide, please. To be effective and consistent, our work group identified the key components of Sentinel. Each story coalesces around each significant element of the safety tool, and yet not one size fits all. We created stories for 4 different audiences, possessing different interests and needs, and yet each story shares the same information about the Sentinel System. The public and provider stories can be found on the Sentinel Initiative website. But most important to us and to this group is the health advocacy story. We will distribute that story and an entire toolkit for your consideration and hopefully your dissemination to your members. Next slide, please. Each narrative for the 4 target audiences include these 5 key elements. First, introducing FDA's safety mission and the fact that the Sentinel System is only one of several important tools in FDA's toolbox to ensure the safety of medical progress. 2, what makes up the Sentinel System? 3, a description of how it works. 4, we provided examples of the Sentinel System in action. And 5, each story describes FDA's commitment to patient privacy. Next slide, please. As Tyler indicated, here's a screenshot of the Sentinel Initiative website. you can connect at sentinelinitiative.org. Next slide, please. Now, here is the magnified location of the Sentinel System story on the website. Next slide, please. We have focused on the key components featured in the health advocacy and public stories for this webinar. This particular segment describes how the Sentinel System works. It explains how the Sentinel System answers basic questions involving large groups and patterns among patients. How many people are taking the same drug or getting the same vaccine? How many are having bad side effects? How many are men and women? How many are young, old, pregnant, or take other drugs? You can see that the health advocacy group story tells the same story, but takes a different approach to meet the needs of your audiences. Next slide. Next, we explain how FDA uses this surveillance tool and what it does with this information to help patients. The FDA gets important answers from the Sentinel System about bad side effects in certain drugs or vaccines. It studies this new information along with other information it's collected from clinicians and drug companies. Then the FDA decides the best way to make providers and patients aware of these side effects. And the FDA can then decide the best way to warn healthcare providers and patients about taking a medical product. Next slide. The work group felt strongly about the value proposition for both the public and health advocacy groups. The first example comes from a 2012 study involving a new anticoagulant. The FDA responded to reports about patients taking this new drug. The reports received concerned patients bleeding too much on the new medication. The Sentinel System gathered information not only from patients on the new medication, but also from a large cohort taking the older medication. The result was that the new intervention was no less safe than the older treatment, and thus patients could continue taking the new medication while additional studies were monitoring the safety of the new product. Next slide, please. Finally, the last important element covered in the Sentinel System story is FDA's commitment to privacy. Next slide. Now, I didn't go to law school because I have artistic ability, but this is one of my proudest pieces coming out of the work group, and it largely comes from two very, very talented people, Susan Foro and Catherine Freitas at the Sentinel Operations Center. It's a very effective infographic highlighting these same elements. This will be part of the website and part of your media kit. At the top is a very succinct explanation of Sentinel. The next four columns describe how it works, the commitment to privacy, the kinds of questions the Sentinel System asks and answers, and how the FDA uses the information. Next slide. Now, we've also provided to you as part of your media toolkit, frequently asked questions that provide a convenient description to help you in your dissemination of the story, infographic, and answer additional questions. I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, next slide, please. And these are just the final FAQs with our contact information if you have additional concerns or questions or comments. Next slide. Okay, so within your toolkit, you will receive a copy of the infographic, copy of both the public story and patient advocacy group story, as well as the FAQs. Next slide, please. Now, here is the link to the toolkit, which has already been posted by Genetic Alliance to you as attendees, and that will also be disseminated following the seminar. Next slide, please. And again, special thanks to every member of the Engagement Partners Workgroup, Bray, Patrick Lake, Sharon Terry, Tyler Coyle, for whom I owe a lot on this, for his leadership on this work group, and also special thanks to Susan and Catherine in the Sentinel Operations Center. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. So it looks like we have a few questions that have appeared in the question box, and if you have questions, go ahead and start typing them in now. Looks like Jennifer Durea. So Tyler, I think maybe you can help us with this. How do data partners validate that their converted data, i.e. data transformed into the common data model, was done correctly? How does the Sentinel system confirm that the data transformation process maintained the semantic representation of the data?
That's a great question. So each data partner has a team on site that whose job it is to maintain the integrity of that data partner's transformation to the common data model. Then, so that's one layer of quality assurance and quality control. Then the Sentinel Operations Center has additional layers of quality assurance and quality control by running standardized queries against each data partner's data to make sure that they're getting logical answers, to make sure that they're capturing the data that they're supposed to be capturing, and to ensure data integrity. To point, one of the main costs of the Sentinel system is ensuring the data integrity of such a monumentally large data system. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that the data is clean, that the data is accurate to the best of our knowledge, and to make sure that the extraction, transformation, and loading, or ETL as we call it, is smooth across data partners. And these data partners typically undergo data refreshes, depending on the data partner, every 3 to 6 months. And so there's, as you can imagine, plenty of opportunity for there to be inconsistencies or errors, but we go to great lengths to ensure that the data are transformed in exactly the right way, so that they really do represent a gold standard of data quality. Thank you for your question.
So there's another question. Does the Sentinel program monitor over-the-counter products for adverse events? And if so, what data is used to capture the use of over-the-counter products?
Terrific question. The short answer is no. Sentinel system does not monitor over-the-counter products. The reason is that the data underpinning the Sentinel system are primarily derived from medical claims, like insurance claims. And so if the product does not generate an insurance claim, it's unlikely that Sentinel will be able to capture it. So things like acetaminophen and aspirin are very difficult, if not impossible, for the Sentinel system to capture. So there are some other data resources and other resources in general for capture and description of those over-the-counter products. One of the ones at FDA is the FDA Adverse Events Reporting System, where patients, providers, and industry can report adverse events for any product, over-the-counter or prescription, whatever is being considered, and can be submitted to FDA and I think they get over 1 million submissions a year, but there's an entire division within the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology whose job it is to go through those submissions, see if there are patterns they can detect that warrant further workup. And then once there is a pattern that they think could warrant workup, depending on the situation, Sentinel could come into play. But it's a great question, and it's a limitation of the Sentinel system, but it's not one that we've been able to figure out a way to overcome just yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. So we have another question, Susan Thornton. So Susan says she is part of a small disease organization that represents very few people. So how would this data help a small patient population, perhaps with rare disease, smaller groups? It seems that this data is broader in its application rather than used for specific diseases.
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a couple ways that the Sentinel system can help with those rare disease populations. First, just by virtue of being as big as it is, there's a reasonable chance that that Sentinel does capture some data for people with that disease. When you're covering tens of millions of people, even diseases and conditions that affect only dozens of people, well, we can still sometimes see those, and so we can go and evaluate safety concerns surrounding those issues. Secondly, the Sentinel system does have the capacity to work and partner with registries at our data partners. So for certain conditions that have a tight-knit registry and advocacy community, the Sentinel system tools can connect data from that registry to the rest of the Sentinel infrastructure, such that that data can be leveraged to answer drug safety questions. And so those are sort of the two ways. Its scale and its capability to connect to registry, I would say, are two ways that populations of rare disease people who have rare diseases can benefit from the Sentinel system. Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit to how Sentinel knows what question to evaluate? I know, so I used to be the patient rep on mini Sentinel, a pilot, before Sentinel was launched and when it was in development. And I think there was a lot of mystery around, what is a signal? And then how is that different from, doing randomized controlled clinical trials? So what does FDA do when they get a signal, or how do they detect a signal? And then what happens after that through Sentinel?
Sure. So that's a great question. So Sentinel is not really well positioned to be doing clinical trials. And so it relies primarily on observational data. And that just means data that is collected in the routine course of people going about their lives and seeing if we can detect patterns and make any inferences based on that data. So to your question about what constitutes a signal and how a signal comes to be, the short answer is that there are lots of different sources of new safety information or new analysis of existing information that can prompt a Sentinel workup, so to speak. So, for example, if a drug company submits an application for a drug product, and during the clinical trials in the application, the reviewer at FDA says, hey, I think that there might be something going on here. Hey, Sentinel, would you mind looking at other products in this class that could reasonably be expected to share features and potentially safety characteristics with this product? Would you look at this and see what we can find? And so that's one potential avenue by which safety information is generated. Another very common way that we determine to work up a signal is through the system that I mentioned earlier, the FAERS system, the Federal FDA Adverse Event Reporting System. And so that's where patients, providers, or industry can go online or in paper if they want, and submit reports of adverse events that they experienced while they were exposed or taking a medical product. And then if there are enough folks who say that they had a particular problem or set of problems in the wake of taking that product, then that would constitute a signal. And it's a great question about what makes a signal. And it's a question that, to be frank, a fair number of FDA reviewers would ask as well. It's not always cut and dry what makes a signal versus what just makes a loose consortium of associated data that we decide may or may not need to be evaluated. And so it's a great question. But generally, a signal is whenever a member of the FDA review staff says, "Hey, I have a concern," and we want to make sure that safety is the number one priority for these products. So that could be in the course of reviewing a drug application. It could also be in the course of reading a journal and saying, "Oh wow, they did a case study of a case report of this outcome after somebody got exposed to a drug. That's a problem. So maybe we should look at this." So those are some of the ways that new safety information and signals are evaluated and decided to be evaluated upon. Obviously, FDA has limited resources. We can't necessarily evaluate every single report all the way from, and go do enhanced pharmacovigilance for all 1.2 million FAERS reports that come in every year. But we use our best judgment, and we have a big staff of clinicians and scientists who can really point us in the right direction to make sure that we're doing the best we can. Thank you.
Kind of along that line, how does the FDA keep the public informed of what Sentinel is currently looking at? Because I think you've just really articulated that something that may be a signal, it requires additional investigation and pulling in, other sources of data. And obviously, you don't want people being harmed by a medical product, but you also don't want people that may be having safe and effective use of a medical product to stop using it prematurely because of anxiety when a question really hasn't been answered. So how do you address keeping the public informed and kind of balancing that while you're answering a question? And then what happens if you do find something that indicates a safety issue? What does FDA do then?
Yeah, another great question. So, FDA has an obligation to protect the public health and ensure that safe and effective drugs are available to the public across the country. FDA has another obligation to be reasonable and to not act with undue haste in such a way that would adversely and unfairly affect a stakeholder for one of the regulated products. So, for example, if we got a report, an unsubstantiated report for a widely used product that didn't really make a lot of sense from a biological perspective, and that none of the clinicians were aware of that being an issue and had never shown up before, it would be really pretty hasty to then post it on our website to say that we're evaluating this product for this very serious outcome, because that would have real ramifications, not just for the drug sponsor or the product sponsor, whose who's working to make that drug available, but to the patients who are using it. More importantly, and it can be very tough to know, and there's a whole, as you can imagine, process at FDA regarding what gets communicated when and to whom. It's very tightly controlled so that we don't have any missteps that would be avoidable. So for the Sentinel system, one way that we try to keep folks informed about what we're doing is through our website. So if you go to sentinelinitiative.org, under the drugs tab, you can look at ongoing analyses. And these are analyses that FDA has committed to conduct for specific products and to assess the safety of and risk of specific outcomes, adverse events, problems, whatever you want to call them, for those products. And those have been vetted and are thoroughly communicated to both the product sponsor and to the public. So again, we want to make sure that everything's available, but we want to also make sure we're meeting our duties as a regulatory agency. So what we can communicate, we do. And at the sentinelinitiative.org website, that's where you're going to get the most up-to-date information about what's under evaluation.
Great. So are there any case examples where you've changed labeling or even, released public alerts, something that's come out of Sentinel?
Yes, absolutely. And so in the past few years, there have been ranging from inclusion in of a Sentinel-related analysis in a commissioner's speech to drug safety communications, which is one of FDA's main avenues for getting the word out about a drug safety concern. There have also been a lot of safety labeling changes where maybe haven't made quite as big an impact on the headlines, but that the drug label has been changed or modified in some way. And so there have also been inclusion of Sentinel analyses in responses to citizen petitions. And this is sort of an interesting area of law that I didn't know about before I came to FDA, but a citizen petition is exactly what it sounds like. It's where any citizen or entity can petition the FDA to do something specifically or to specifically not do something. And so we have an entire office that manages and sort of handles these citizen petitions. And Sentinel analyses have helped answer these citizen petitions that are often pivotal points of communication with the public and engagement with stakeholders and the public at large. So all of these examples would be available and are available on the sentinelinitiative.org website under the How ARIA Analyses Have Been Used by FDA. I think that also there have also been instances, in addition to speeches, of presentations before advisory committees at FDA, where Sentinel analyses have been pivotal to inform the questions before advisory committees, which are collections of experts in a given field brought together to be asked questions by FDA staff. And so it's really an exercise in making sure that FDA is getting the highest quality information from leaders in the field that is objective and scientifically based. So again, I would just direct you to the sentinelinitiative.org website where that information is available.
Thanks. So on the line, we have a lot of patient groups, and I know you mentioned that Sometimes you can pull in, rare disease community-specific data from registries if they're part of, I guess, some type of capture through the data partners. So is that how it would work as far as FDA getting access to the data in patient registries? Would they have to have a data partner as the intermediary to help structure some of that data into the common data model, or is there a direct mechanism for people to get involved in Sentinel and share their data?
That's a great question, and I think my answer to that is probably both. I think you would probably want to explore both options. This is something that I don't have a ton of experience with personally, and so I think that if that were something that folks wanted to pursue, the best course of action would be to reach out to me personally, so that I could connect you with our colleagues at the Sentinel Operations Center, who could provide a much more robust answer about the best course of action for that. And so I would, freely admit that I'm not the expert on that, but that I could point you in the right direction.
Great, thanks so much. So we're getting down into the final minutes of this webinar. If anybody has questions they'd like to ask, please go ahead and type them into the question box. And in the meantime, while we're seeing if any additional questions come in, Steve, if you could just, give us a reminder of, how patient voice has been engaged in shaping Sentinel, and then, what people can do today as far as, getting information about the Sentinel story and then sharing it with their patient populations.
Thanks, Bray. I think that what always drove this multi-stakeholder work group was raising awareness about this important safety tool. And I don't think that, if you look at the 4 stakeholder groups, that covers so many different constituencies that have common interests about medical product safety. So with respect to the public, health advocacy groups represented by this webinar, by providers themselves, we developed along with members of the AMA a separate narrative for providers who themselves were fairly unaware of the existence of Sentinel and how it works. It's a complicated system. So broadly speaking, I believe that health advocacy, patient advocacy groups can do a couple of things. I think that it's important to share with your respective audiences this important post-marketing safety surveillance tool. It's not the only tool that FDA uses to keep patients safe, but it's a very, very important and vigilant tool. I think that you can refer to your media toolkit, which provides the health advocacy or patient advocacy group narrative that sets forth how it works, provides examples in a language that I believe that most people will understand and find meaningful. We did a lot of work with regard to the public message as well to help members of the public understand at a reading level that is in layman's terms about a very, very complicated system. I've been working on it for 3 years. I'm just barely scratching the surface about how complex this data system is. I think that by disseminating it, that will be an effective tool. I think also in checking the website and encouraging more patients to view what Sentinel does, how it works, what kinds of signals and the large patterns of aggregate data that it follows. I think that's another way that patients can be involved. I think it's also important. I see this kind of as patient advocacy groups also play an important role as kind of as another channel or as ambassadors by sharing what we learn as patients with our healthcare providers to help them understand that that the healthcare providers also have a responsibility to understand the safety surveillance tool and that the importance of it, and also that they should be vigilant in following some of the results and outcomes that come from the types of signals that are being studied by the data partners. So I hope that that's responsive. I think that the greatest task for the work group was to just raise awareness. We didn't want this, FDA felt strongly that it did not want the public and all the other constituencies, most importantly, patient advocacy groups, to be left in the dark about this important tool and to understand it. I think that you should also understand that on the planning board there are 3 patient representatives. I'm one of them, Bray is another, and Sharon Terry is another, and we're often, there are monthly meetings, and we attend those and raise the patient perspective in those meetings. So there's a number of channels in which patients' voice is not only represented, but more importantly, listened to. And I think that the aims of this webinar is to share that message so that you can, in turn, then hand off to your respective members to share with themselves, caregivers, and providers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Tyler, it looks like we've got one more question just seeking additional clarity coming in from Yusuf Macaroon or Macaroon. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. If you could just articulate the differences and maybe the interactions again between Sentinel and MedWatch.
Sure. So Sentinel and MedWatch are 2 tools in the drug safety toolkit. MedWatch relies on information coming from providers, patients, or industry to making its way to FDA so that FDA can evaluate it. So in that respect, it's technically a passive surveillance system because FDA is waiting for that information to arrive. And if the person who submits that data doesn't take the initiative to submit it, then FDA won't necessarily know about it. And so that's MedWatch. Now, Sentinel is designed to be a more active surveillance system. And so what Sentinel can do and is developing additional capabilities to do is go and detect signals and seek out using these data. This is one of the big areas of development in Sentinel right now, to seek out and use the available data to see if the system can detect the signals on its own with guidance from FDA and from the Sentinel Operations Center. But if this massive database can be leveraged using new technologies or tree-based detection and assessment tools like tree scan or sequence symmetry analyses, these kinds of evaluations can be leveraged in such a way that it really becomes a more active surveillance system. And so I would say that Sentinel and FAERS and MedWatch are the same thing. They complement each other because there's information that Sentinel is never going to get that will only show up in FAERS. And there's information that FAERS is probably going to miss that will only show up in Sentinel and using the Sentinel infrastructure and tools and capabilities. So they really work together. Neither is going to be supplanting the either because they both serve essential functions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tyler. So we're down to our last few minutes. We know that people on the line after today, you can immediately go to the website. You can learn more about Sentinel. You can download toolkits. In about a week, we will have these slides and this recording available on the Genetic Alliance website. Tyler, I assume at that point, your contact information, if people wanted to get in touch about what's in their registries and how to best make use of that, and maybe even explore opportunities for the patient-reported data to be pulled into this equation in Sentinel. Sounds like that might be exploratory, but that the best route would be to get in touch with you via email. Is that correct?
That's correct. If not with me, then Steve Mikita can direct you to Susan Faro, who works at the Sentinel Operations Center, and can get you connected to the right people to work with you and answer your questions and go forward.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tyler. Thank you, Steve, for such an informative interaction today. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that all the patient groups that are on the line will take the opportunity to go out and share the toolkits. And thank you to the FDA and the Sentinel team for the great work that they've been doing, and many thanks to Genetic Alliance for being our host of this webinar this afternoon and helping better engage patients in FDA activities and safety and surveillance of medical products. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you,
great
Bray.
afternoon.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you all. Have a great day.